Hello there, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you, and a big, big hug. I hope you've had a fabulous day. I've had a beautiful day myself, and I'm so looking forward to reading part 2 of the story to you tonight, which you're really going to enjoy. So before we get settled down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight.
Tina's way out was to end her life, just so that she could get off this battlefield and find her peace. And I would like to think that wherever she is right now, she's found that peace.
I'm sure she has found her peace, Iris said.
Tina was a very delicate person, even in the way she dressed. All those bohemian, unorthodox silky dresses she wore, they almost floated on her. They made her look like an exotic, very colourful butterfly.
That's a very good description of my sister, Ken admitted, rubbing the day-old stubble on his chin reflectively. For a moment he looked as if his thoughts were far, far away, as if he'd travelled back in time to his early childhood, and was revisiting a special memory that he'd spent with his sister. Iris was sure that she'd seen his eyes misting up for a moment.
I remember growing up. Tina took a long time to recover from the bumps in the road that wouldn't affect most of us. I mean, if someone gives you a funny look in the school playground or was rude to you, most of us would soldier on with our lives and it wouldn't be a big deal. But to Tina it always was. If someone was horrible to her in the school playground, she'd require a great deal of coaxing to return to school the following day. She would soak in hurt like an olive in brine and marinate in it all the time. Every time someone said something mean to her, she'd shrivel up and retreat into her shell like a frightened tortoise. I do remember when I was growing up, Tina took a long time to recover from the wounds of life, if you know what I mean. The bumps in the road, so to speak. Things that you and I would get over pretty quickly. Like if someone gave us a funny look in the store, or was rude to us in some way. It wouldn't be a big deal to us, but it always was a big deal to Tina. In Tina's case, if someone was horrible to her at school, she would require a great deal of coaxing by my parents to return the following day. She'd soak in their words like an olive in brine, marinating in all her hurt. Every time someone said a mean thing, she would shrivel up almost at once, retreating in her shell like a frightened tortoise. I remember 2 strapping girls at school, who both looked pretty fearsome, bullied her once. They put a pair of knickers over her head during school assembly, so that everyone was laughing at poor Tina. She was so mortified to be humiliated like this in front of the entire school, especially when people started calling her Knickerhead later on. She took things hard like that, and as her big brother I always had to find a way of protecting her. Ostensibly, I couldn't sit back and watch those vindictively spiteful girls making fun out of my delicate sister, precisely because she was so delicate. I was naturally enraged. I stormed over to the girls and snatched the knickers right off my sister's head. My sister was naturally distraught. I put those very same knickers that I'd retrieved from my sister onto the bully's head, the one who'd been making fun of my sister. Everyone began to laugh at the bully, because she looked ridiculous with those knickers on her head, far more so than my sister had done. She was fuming. Her face grew as red as a tomato. She spat out venom at me. I was delighted to see that she got a taste of the same kind of humiliation that she'd cruelly subjected my sister to. Let's just say the headmaster at the time, Mr. Chamberlain, was not remotely impressed that his assembly had been rudely interrupted by a cruel, very malicious prank, and he wasn't standing for any of it. So the 2 bullies, including myself, were given detentions for disturbing the peace during assembly. Suffice to say, Mr. Chamberlain took me to one side and said it was very perverse of me to put a woman's knickers on a young lady's head. As being a man, well, it wasn't a good look, was it? So I got into even more trouble, but I didn't care. I'd have done anything to protect Tina. What I'm trying to say, Irish love, is I had to fight some of my sister's battles for her. She was vulnerable, easy pickings for a bully, you could say. I hasten to say after that assembly, I went after those two bullies and told them they'd get a right old clobbering over the ear if they didn't leave my sister the hell alone and stopped making fun of her. I succeeded in scaring the bejesus out of both of them. They knew by my demeanour that I meant business, and I wasn't messing around. Let me tell you, Iris, school was tough for Tina. She was like an injured little Bambi that the coyotes could smell a mile away. And what do bullies do when they pick up any vulnerability? They go straight for the jugular. So let's just say Tina never had life very easy. I get that, Ken, I really do. I understand why you're making all kinds of excuses for your sister and defending what she did in taking her own life. Don't forget, I've known Tina for many years. I'm well aware of what she was like and how fragile she was. You're right, she wasn't like regular folk. I knew when I met her she was extremely different, very unorthodox. She struck me as being very insecure and emotionally needy. I agree with you, she was a sensitive soul. But why on earth did she take her own life? If she was feeling so fragile, she should have asked for help. Did she not stop to think of her own son for a single second? I don't think it was as straightforward as that, love. Nothing is just black and white. You need to understand that there is always some unexplored, uncharted middle ground that can mean trying to find the answers as to why someone has done something is like looking at a complicated, ambiguously foggy haze and trying to see through it all, and that's close to impossible. I will tell you this, of course. Tina has never been comfortable in her own skin, or with her life on this earth. She told me that many times over, that she felt she never belonged here. I remember often when she was a little girl, she'd tirelessly stare up at the stars in the moonlit sky, and I would ask her what she was doing. She would tell me she missed her home, and she'd point up at the stars. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about, but now I sometimes wonder if maybe she was a starseed, from another planet, let's just say. You heard what turmoil she was in when she phoned me on the night of her death, before she got to swallow all those pills. I may remind you, Ken, Iris told her husband, Tina phoned you up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't night time. Well, it was dark outside, of course. I do recall you picked up the phone grumbling madly, saying, "Who is this?" Because you had a thumping headache, didn't you? And like any normal person, you didn't appreciate being woken up so rudely at that time of the morning. I was fast asleep, but when Tina called you, I woke up after I overheard all her sobbing. Let's not kid, she was in quite the state. We were both thrown out of our sleep rather rudely that morning. I remember thinking someone had died, because your sister was so devastated. That's the word you're looking for, isn't it, love? Yes, that's right. She was devastated. I could hardly hear a single word she was saying, even when you put the cell phone on speaker. She was blubbering so much. But you seemed to understand what she was saying, because I guess you've known her for a long time. Don't be so hard on Tina, love, especially now that she's no longer here. For the record, I may have sounded grumpy on the phone when she called me, but I'm glad she called me. I always wanted to be there for her when she was in a bad place. Think what she was going through at the time. I can't imagine it myself. She'd been away from her apartment for a couple of days out of state on a business course. She'd taken an early flight back home, a day early. She returned home to her apartment at about 1 o'clock in the morning, hoping to surprise her boyfriend Pierre. She walks into her bedroom, only to find Pierre fast asleep in her king-size bed, with his arms snuggled around a strange semi-naked woman, who had the audacity to ask her who she was when she entered her own bedroom. Tina told that woman she was the owner of the apartment, and that the woman was sleeping in her bed with her boyfriend. I guess that went down like a lead balloon with the woman, because as I understand, She was spitting at Tina like a viper. Tina told Pia and the woman in her bed to get out of the apartment at once, or she'd call the police after them. So they both left the apartment with their tails between their legs. I understand that Pia did declare that the woman who was sharing his bed with him was just a friend, which didn't go down at all well with the woman, of course, who said she was nothing of the kind, and that she and Pia had been an item for the last 6 months or so. My sister was devastated, Iris. I want you to think about that for a moment. Imagine if you came home and found me in bed with another woman. How would you feel about that? And imagine you had a teenager sleeping in that same house at the very same time that was oblivious to what was going on under your roof, and that I was entertaining another woman in our bed. How would that make you feel? I'd kill you, and the woman, of course, without question, Iris admitted. But all the same, I'd never take a bunch of pills to end my life. Never. I understand that, love. But you're much stronger and much more courageous than Tina was. How much do I have to keep telling you that, without sounding like a broken record? I know she loved Pia very much. She never expected him to betray her trust like this. But for Pia to invite another woman into Tina's apartment, when her 14-year-old kid is sleeping in his bedroom downstairs, is nothing short of disgusting and exceedingly disrespectful, to say the very least. I never did like Pia. I always thought he was a lower form of pond life. Too bad Tina didn't see him for what he really was. I don't disagree with you on this one, Iris admitted. I agree with you. It was shameful for Pia to invite that strange woman into Tina's apartment, while Tina was away on business, and while her own teenage son was asleep in his bedroom downstairs. I can't imagine if that poor Jake had walked into his mother's bedroom, only to find Pia in bed with another woman, while his mother was away. I thank God he never knew what was going on behind his mother's back. Oh, my goodness, Ken. You don't suppose that Jake knew what was going on? No, of course he knew nothing about what really transpired that night. All he knows is he found his mother deceased in her bed the following morning. He observed all the pills lying strewn all over the bedroom floor, so he could easily deduce what had happened. He must have thought it was strange, though, that Pia was gone. But maybe he thought the couple had argued about something, and his mother in her distress had overdosed on pills, because he was well aware of how fragile his mother actually was. I am, though, rather surprised he didn't hear all the chaos going on in the apartment when Tina kicked out Pia and his girlfriend. Well, I suppose you have to be grateful for small mercies, don't you? Said Iris. At least he didn't see all that. Maybe he's a deep sleeper. Remind me, Ken, where the hell did your sister meet Pia? I don't think I ever asked her. What brought them together? I think Tina met Pia on one of those dating websites. She was very lonely at the time, very vulnerable. She told me she was ready for a relationship. I warned her to be exceedingly careful, looking for a boyfriend online. I'd have been far happier if she'd met a man in a more civilized way, like a friend introducing her to a friend, if you know what I mean. When you're dating people online, it's like a lucky dip. You never know what you're going to end up with. I mean, on the surface, someone can look good, like something you buy from China, online, that looks expensive until you realize after a bit of wear and tear the item you brought was made from inferior fabric and is falling apart. The same can be said for some people that you meet. You never did like your sister's boyfriend, Pia, did you? Said Iris reflectively, a look of admiration suddenly washing across her face. I must admit, Ken, I will say this about you. You are a very good judge of character. I will give you that. When I first met Pia at that dinner party your sister invited us to, at her apartment, I thought he was utterly and totally charming. He was very easy on the eye, wasn't he? 6 foot tall, very well built, with gorgeous, thick, curly black hair, and greenish-grey eyes. He seemed like the whole package to me. And goodness gracious, that French accent of his would make any woman melt like butter. I mean, honestly, it was so sexy, wasn't it? And I could see why Tina was so enamoured by him. I remember her being all dewy-eyed after they met. And she told me she'd met the one. I was genuinely happy for her. I really was. She told you that? Asked Ken, looking somewhat bewildered. That he was the one, I mean. That was very forthcoming of her. Well, she did. Didn't I say? I think it was the French accent that sealed the deal for your sister. She was completely smitten by him. Unabashedly so, I might say. Well, Pierre's mother was French, which was probably why he had acquired the French accent along the way. But I do know his father was American. I think he was from Michigan or somewhere like that. Pierre was born in Paris and lived there for many years. I never liked him from the moment I laid eyes on him. I knew there was something extremely underhanded and shifty about him. I picked up on that immediately. I was exceedingly worried he'd break Tina's heart. I noticed he had quite the ego on him, and he thought he was all that. Everywhere he went, women would swoon over him. I guess he knew it, and loved all the attention. I confronted him about my fears, concerning Tina. I didn't want him to hurt my sister. Iris looked astounded to hear her husband confess to this. You did? You confronted him? Where did you do this? Was it at the dinner party we attended? You never told me any of this. There was nothing to tell, really, said Ken somewhat lamely. I asked Pierre to meet me at the restaurant La Romana on 2nd Street. I told him the meal would be on me. You see, even then I instinctively knew that Pierre was very penny-pinching and tight, unless you were the one, of course, that was going to pay the bill. I cannot tell you how many times over the years, when it came to paying the bill, at the end of a meal, Pierre would just disappear, end up in the toilet claiming he had a bout of diarrhea. Or he would conveniently have left his wallet at home. And one time he offered to pay and the credit card he used was rejected. So I ended up paying. He was a freeloader. So I knew about that. I told him I wanted to chat with him man to man. He agreed to meet up with me. And then, of course, I came out with it. I asked him straight what his intentions were with Tina. I didn't beat around the bush. Well, good on you. I'm glad you did that, Ken. I had no idea. What did he say to that? I'm sure he didn't appreciate being interrogated like that. Of course he didn't. He asked me if I thought I was Tina's father, because I sure was behaving like I was. He felt I had no right to butt into his relationship with Tina. He was quite affronted by my concerns, and pretty much told me to mind my own business, and butt out of their lives. I managed to calm things down between the two of us. As he was about to march out of the restaurant, the spaghetti carbonara arrived on the table, so he was quick to change his mind about leaving. I told him in no uncertain terms that yes, I was Tina's brother, and not her father, but I still considered it my responsibility to watch out for my sister. So yes, I was sticking out my neck for her, on her account, simply because I didn't want her to get hurt. Of course, that wasn't received well. He didn't like what I had to say at all. I think he thought I was insinuating he was a cad or a lowlife that was only using Tina. I told him if he was only interested in a fly-by-night relationship with my sister, that he should end things with her very quickly, to avoid hurting her long term. I told him that Tina was a very sensitive soul, and warned him that she was different to the other woman he had lightly dated over the years, that she was like a fine piece of porcelain china that you needed to handle with care, lest it should break. And what did he say to that? He assured me he'd fallen head over heels in love with Tina, and had every intention of asking her to marry him in due course. But he didn't want to rush things. He wanted to take things very slowly, one step at a time. And you believed him? No, of course I didn't believe a word of it, said Ken very frankly. I absolutely knew he would hurt my sister. I could feel it in my gut, and it made me nauseously sick. But what could I do about it? As you were saying, Tina was all dewy-eyed over Pierre, as though the sun shone out of his very backside. Have you ever tried to tell someone blinded by love that they're dating a no-good loser? Because if you have, I assure you they don't take it kindly. If I had told Tina how I really felt about Pr, it would have created a big wedge between the two of us. So I knew I'd have to sit back and watch things fall apart. Sometimes that's all you can do. Parents do it the world over when they watch a beloved child of theirs marrying a man they consider to be a scumbag. But they can't interfere, can they? They have to sit back and watch that relationship implode. That's all you can do. You make a good point there, Ken. Sometimes you just can't butt in or interfere. But Pr, well, he wasn't a good man, was he? You were right about that. He definitely wasn't a good man, Ken agreed. I mean, there were red flags flying at full mast everywhere you looked. Pr had been laid off work for 1.5 years. He didn't even bother to attempt looking for another job. And that sounded alarm bells for me. He was sponging off my sister, using her money to wine and dine this other woman, whom he dated for 6 whole months. My sister was funding their relationship, and he was spending her money on this other woman like water. It was absolutely disgusting. Poor Tina, said Iris sympathetically. She really was exploited by Pr and taken full advantage of. I wonder if Pr was using her all along. I mean, he was obviously a freeloader. Of that I'm in no doubt. Of course he was using my sister, said Ken angrily. He never loved her. He was looking for someone to exploit and take advantage of. And my sister was a soft touch, wasn't she? I'm furious with myself for not jumping in the car and driving straight to her apartment that morning when she phoned us. If you remember, earlier on that evening, we had both attended a cocktail party at the Farrisons' house. So I had too much to drink, and I still believe I might have been over the limit. It didn't help that I had a headache from hell, so when I woke up my head was thumping like mad. I tried, of course, to comfort Tina on the phone. I knew she was a sensitive soul, of course I did. But never for a single second did I predict that she'd just take her own life like that. I never saw that happening in 1,000,000 months of Sundays. We arranged to go for coffee the following morning, to talk about everything that had transpired between her and Pr. I thought I'd successfully managed to calm her down, but it turns out I did nothing of the kind. Iris suddenly gripped her husband's hand. For God's sake, Ken, don't you dare start. Don't be so damn hard on yourself. None of what Tina did is your fault. You weren't to know she was going to overdose on pills. Maybe not, but I did know she was in a fragile place. I should have got someone to check up on her at the very least, to see if she was all right. But I didn't. I failed my sister. I mean, I have the next-door neighbour's phone number, don't I? I just thought I'd go over to her in the morning and perk her up with some words of encouragement. But instead, she took her own life, soon after my phone call. I do recall her telling me never to forget how much she loved me. Why didn't those words sound alarm bells for me? Because you had drunk so much. You were half asleep, weren't you? When you answered the phone call, well, you weren't all there. I mean, it's hard to pay attention to everything someone is saying in the early hours of the morning. Don't keep harping on about what you could have done. It's too late for that now. We can't cry over spilt milk, can we? That is why I'm so aggrieved with myself, for not reading between the lines. My sister needed me, and I let her down. I feel very sorry for young Jake, having to find his mother like that non-responsive the following morning. That poor boy had to call 911. Can you imagine how hard that must have been on him? Hasn't he been through enough? That's why we have to take him in, love, and make him part of our family. He's lost too much in one lifetime. Too much for any boy of his age. Of course I feel very sorry for Jake. And like you say, this is not his fault. But it doesn't change the fact, Ken, that I don't fancy having to be responsible for a 14-year-old boy. Apart from anything else, he probably needs trauma counselling. And I can't possibly deal with a kid that is emotionally fractured. I just can't. Look, love, none of this is easy on either of us. I'm genuinely sorry that Tina took her life, I really am. Not only because I've lost a beautiful sister, or because Jake has lost a mother, but I sincerely blame myself for not being there for her. But the least I can do for my late sister is to take Jake into our home and give him the best possible life that I can. It's the least we can do. I know this is not what either of us signed up for, but we have to do the right thing by Jake. I need you to be on board with me on this, Iris. I'm counting on your support. I cannot do this without you.
Iris knew that Ken was absolutely right. The fact that his sister Tina had committed suicide because she was so broken up and overwrought about her boyfriend Pierre cheating on her was hard for Iris to stomach. She couldn't comprehend how any loving mother could be selfish enough to take her own life when she had a responsibility in taking care of her child. But she knew well that when emotions are heightened, people did irrationally stupid and sometimes impulsive things in the heat of the moment. Maybe Tina hadn't even intended to kill herself, and her overdose was just a cry for help. That was always a distinct possibility. Iris knew that Tina had not been like anybody else she'd ever met. From the moment that Iris had actually met Tina, she had been struck by Tina's wholehearted innocence and gentle demeanour. Ken describing Tina like the princess and the pea was a very apt and fitting description. Perhaps some people really were far too sensitive for this world. Soon after 14-year-old Jake had moved into their family home, there had been many awkward, very uncomfortable silences around the dinner table every evening. For what on earth did you say to a young teenager that had lost absolutely everything? Ken had tried to make some kind of friendly chatter to his nephew Jake, but Jake would shut down and would answer his questions very politely with 2-word syllables. So getting anything out of the young man was rather like extracting blood from a stone. Ken reasoned with himself that he and his wife Iris needed to give Jake plenty of space to grieve in his own time. Jake would lock himself up in his bedroom for hours on end, where he'd listen to loud, booming rock music that would give Iris a headache. Iris initially had not been very kind towards Jake, but then she had tried to be nice to him. After all, his mother taking his own life was not his fault. She couldn't help but think how sad it was that Jake didn't have a father he could turn to for refuge. Unfortunately, Jake's own father had been a sperm donor to one of those sperm banks, and so his identity would never be known, which was most unfortunate. Tina had been desperate for a child of her own, and she had not met a suitable partner at the time, so she'd got herself impregnated with a stranger's sperm, so that her dream to become a mother would be fully realized. It meant that the fact that Tina had taken her own life was all the more horrifying, given she had left the child she had wanted so much behind, like an old piece of baggage she had forgotten about, in her haste to escape this world. The last few months had been tumultuous, to say the very least, and having Jake under their roof had not been easy by any manner of means. Iris was exceedingly glad that Jake had been seeing a trauma counsellor, but whether his sessions had helped or not, she couldn't be sure. Jake seemed caught up in his lugubrious melancholia, and never seemed to communicate with the couple very much. The only time that Iris had ever seen a light going on in Jake's eyes was when Ken had announced that they were going camping over dinner one evening, when the table had felt like a mausoleum, as no one really said very much. But things changed in a heartbeat, as the word camping had magical powers, for the atmosphere had shifted around the table so fast, as if the darkness had suddenly receded. That evening Iris had ordered Chinese takeout for dinner, and as Ken popped a piece of sweet and sour pork into his mouth, after he'd finished chewing, he wiped his mouth with a serviette, and then he cut the silence with a knife by turning around to Jake and saying, "Just so you know, Jake, in a couple of days' time we will be going camping for a few days. I hope you've got some suitable outdoor clothes to wear, and some good walking shoes. If you haven't, you needn't worry. Your Aunt Iris will take you shopping to buy you everything you need. Isn't that right, Iris?" "That's right," said Iris. "Walking shoes are very important. You're going to need a good quality torch as well, and a whistle, in case you get lost.
so you'll be easier to find."
"Camping," said Jake, his eyes opening up wide. "We're going camping. Is that for real? I've never been camping before. I always wanted to go camping."
"That's right. We're going camping," said Ken with a broad smile on his face.
He couldn't wipe it off, as he was delighted to see his nephew's enthusiasm.
"You see, every year, me and your aunt, well, we can never agree where to go on our holidays. So we decided that one year I would choose our destinations and where we would go, and then the following year Iris would choose our holiday destinations, so that it would be fair. This year it's my turn, and I've chosen for us to go camping. Have you ever been camping before, Jake?"
"No, never," said Jake soberly. "When I went on holidays with Mum and Pier, well, it was usually to pretty places by the coast. We went to Florida and Hawaii. But I've never been camping before, and I've always wanted to go camping. Where exactly are we going?" he asked, the sparkle in his eyes very pronounced. Iris stared at Jake, in bewilderment, with wide, astonished eyes, her astounded jaw almost dropping to the ground, for she didn't recognize the ebullient young teenager sitting opposite her. His dead, vacuously empty, almost lifeless eyes lit up like when you connect the gas to a stove and the flames suddenly ignite.
"We are going to the Ozarks, Jake. Do you know where the Ozarks are?" asked Ken.
"Yes, I know all about the Ozarks. I've seen so many pictures," said Jake excitedly. "The Ozarks are a region that spans 5 states, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas and Illinois. But you'll find most of the mountains are in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, a section I assume we will be going camping in, as that part, I imagine, is where the views will be sensational."
"Well, what can I say? You're very clever, young man," said Ken, looking genuinely impressed by Jake's grasp of American geography. "What can I say? You've got it in a nutshell. We're going to a mountainous part of the Ozarks."
"Correction," said Iris, rolling her eyes. "A mountainous area in the middle of nowhere. Isn't that right, Ken?" she said, looking at her husband quite sharply. "As far as your uncle is concerned, Jake, places off the beaten track, rarely float his boat." "I can understand that," said Jake. "When you're camping, you want to get away from it all, don't you?"
"That's right," said Ken. "You can see your aunt doesn't approve of my holiday destinations."
"Of course I don't approve," said Iris. "I hate being eaten alive by insects and walking for miles and miles through wood groves of trees, getting covered in burrs and scratches. Furthermore, I don't enjoy purifying water, collecting firewood and cooking over a gas hob. It's not my idea of fun." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.